framework of art. Maria de Pilar Lopez Saavedra is the first.
You're right. That's what I'm talking about.
She and they are the first artists we're introducing. I met her through Victoria, and when I first saw their work, I had an immediate connection to it. On the common ground that we're both queer and we're both Latin people, no? Latine people.
That's right.
Her work touches on important issues around the queer community in a Hispanic context, such as religion, family, and what does it mean to be queer in when you're Latino or Latina or Latinx or Latina. Issues like coming out, you know, and like what does coming out mean when your family has such a strong religious background, the backlash that that can carry. And I'm sure a lot of you folks that are here have maybe experienced that. And if you haven't, maybe you can relate to it in some form of way or another. Through video, installation, text, and other multimedia tools, their work explores issues that compose individual identity, but how these individual identities compose macro identity. So by speaking on an individual scale, they are able to dissect a macro identity. So the individual becomes the culture, and the culture becomes politics. And it's dialogue back and forth between their work. We're going to start with some of their earlier work and go kind of chronological. And you're welcome to, at any point, maybe raise your hand if you have a question or want to have something further explained. So without further ado, Maria de Pilar Lopez Saavedra.
Thank you. First things first, I really don't want this to be formal at all. I hate the way in which artist talks are usually run because I'm not teaching you guys anything. We're having a conversation. So please do interrupt or shout out if you like something, if something sticks with you, like please let me know because that's what all of this is for and that's why I make all of this stuff. So, thank you for your introduction. That was really beautiful. I love the way that you talk about your work. So I'm going to start way back in the day. I'm only going to touch on about 12 pieces, which I feel like are the milestones for the concepts that I've been working with and the changes that I've been seeing in my own work. The first one that I want to talk about is these letters that I made for my mom. So basically, I've been gay forever, right? So let's start there. I feel like that's part of the intro. And I'm Colombian. I was born in Colombia. I was raised in Miami. And growing up, I always knew that my parents kind of weren't okay with the identity that I was going to grow into and going to one day have to face. So we had a lot of struggles with that, and eventually my parents would eventually go through my books and my sketchbooks to read if I was writing about women, if I was having sexual experiences, and my mom threw away a lot of my sketchbooks, she threw away a lot of my things. So my response to that was to come up with a language that no one could understand. So when I was about 17, I started making these pieces where I wanted to think about the topic of a love note or this romantic gesture and sort of reclaim that, but for my mom. So I was writing all of these letters to her in which I was explaining like the things that she wanted to know and the things that she was looking for, but in a way that was just actually me trying to reach out to her like as a daughter. So that's where the language, it's called invalid or invalido, it came to be. This is a detail shot of it, and that was really important for me. And I've made, the first couple of works, these are all in high school that I was making, they're all for my mom, which I think is interesting. I didn't put together until Julio and I were talking about it. The second one is this one where I'm referencing this like super white writer, because I was really into like Euro poetry and literature at the time. We've grown since then. But at the time, this was relevant to me, and so I have these lines that came before the language that I would call poems. And for this piece, I decided to make a structure that would actually like leave those marks on the skin. And I asked my mom to allowed me to do that to her skin as well. So in this moment, this was after I tried to come out the first time when I was 15, and the response was literally violent and just complete rejection. So we fell into this era of like silence for about 2 years, where my family and I didn't really like talk to each other. Like it was really weird. And so for me, I needed some sort of connection. Thank you so much. I needed some sort of something that would bridge me and my mom together. So in this work, these marks that sort of were the foundation for the language, were the only thing sort of bringing our bodies together. It's one of my favorite pieces I've made, for sure, and it's for my mom. So following this piece.
Wait, can you talk about asking your mom to like do that with you? That's like such an intense thing.
Of course, the thing is that when it comes to like Latino parents, in my experience, they're really hype about the art and about the practice, but they never truly even seek to understand what it's really about. They're just really excited that you're doing stuff, that you care about school, that you're, you know, not pregnant, that you're not falling into these stereotypes of like what we should be doing at this age or what could happen. So I just remember being like, Mom, I'm making this piece, I really want to make marks on the skin, like we're going to be connected this way, we look the same. Like I was looking at the pictures and I was like, look, you can't tell like whose body is who. And that to me was really special, but I don't think she really processed it. Like they've known about the language for a while now. It's been 7 years since I made this work, which was when I made it when I was about 16, 17. And they haven't attempted to learn the language or decode it or anything like that. So there is always a sense of like pride and like, I'm very proud of you for making art, like wow, I don't understand this, but then that's something that I'm definitely trying to break down is art and accessibility. I think that my parents automatically see art as something that they won't understand.
And can I jump in?
Of course.
I think that the term accessibility comes, like you really bring it to your practice a lot, well not a lot later, but after these works. And you'll start to see how...
It's definitely a thing.
Yeah, and how the material, you're thinking about accessibility and how people can read into it.
Mm-hmm.
So, accessibility, especially for, I know my parents as well,
yeah.
they even avoid going to like art museums because
Yes.
they feel they won't be
able to
understand, especially contemporary art.
Exactly.
So, when we think about art in a contemporary term and what we're doing as artists, and we talk about making accessible art, yet we don't make it accessible by either making very robust and inaccessible art statements or
Yes.
using materials that are
impossible to relate to on a normal basic level.
It almost seems like we don't want people to relate. We
Exactly.
want to exclude people, and it becomes again putting up this barrier of institutional marginalization of who has the who has the privilege of accessing and who has the privilege of understanding and understanding even the word we're using.
Yeah, or like the reasoning behind the
Yeah.
piece. I think that's a great point, and that is something that definitely think about. But that was one of those moments where I was trying to connect, and yet the way in which she came into the conversation, or my dad, also the way that they view my art is something that's already so distant from them that they don't even, their only connection to it is me. You know, and the love that they feel for me, or the pride that they feel that I'm doing these things, but they don't really attempt to deconstruct it. So my attempt in my work is to stop being so up in here, because if my own parents can't understand my work, then like, what the fuck am I doing here, you know? Next piece is Bloodlines, which is also from my mom. I made, with the language within Valid, I wrote with lipstick on this glass, these two glasses that are like hanging, and they're connected through these yarns that I like braided, which is to me really interesting now looking back at it, because a lot of my work eventually has to do with my own body and my hair. And me and my mom never had those moments of like her doing my hair or teaching me how to do my own hair, because it was always, my hair was so beautiful and long that it was just to be let down. It was not to be touched. It was not to be put up. It was not to be braided. So in a way, I had that own moment with myself and with my own conversations for her. So this is a very like minimal, like Latino wants to please white contemporary museum themes. But I fucked with it, and I think it was really important for me to make this work because I really have been thinking about letters and communication and my openness. And this is where it all started. It was in the domestic space, in familial relationships. So following this, I made a lot of work, but for my senior showcase, so I was about 18 years old in Miami, New World. I wanted to make a big statement because I was a senior, I was leaving away college, and I had made all this work with this coded language that no one knew how to decode because there was no way to decode it. So for this performance, which is actually my first performance and my first real installation, I was talking to Julio about it yesterday, we were running through this, and I was like, this to me was like a birth in a way. Like this performance, even in the way it's set up, like the corner, the mirrors, like that experience was so intense and so visceral that I feel like it stayed with me for a really long time, and the work that I've made past that has really referenced this piece. So I made this mirror installation in which I presented this book, which is the decoder for my language. Hola. So I made a book in which I have each letter and then the direct translation for the code, and it's on these wood blocks, which were to reference my dad, because he has a wood company, and I grew up watching him like install wood floors and always wanting to participate and not being able to because I'm a girl. But I got it back because now I make a lot of gate work and I use my hands a lot. So I'm facilitating that for myself. So I made the scanned version of the book. So like A, B, B, C, C. Now you can't say that you can't understand my work because it's on the website. So if you ever wanted to decode my life and my work, you can't read this, but it's instructions for the audience at that moment. So we set up the book and I performed, and I was writing all these messages and doing this free thought of just a queer body in a public space. I was surrounded by people watching me and taking pictures of me. And it was really important for me to create a relationship between myself and the audience in which I'm being so vulnerable and I'm really writing intimate thoughts. But I didn't want myself to be a show. I didn't want my experiences to just be consumable. And that's why the code is so important, because everyone is visually consuming, but to really understand there was a necessity on the part of the audience to participate as well and to put in their own labor so that we build this intimacy and they meet me halfway.
And touching on the topic of becoming a spectacle, we were talking about this yesterday, how
yes, please.
Many times, especially in Hispanic and Latin communities, queerness almost becomes a spectacle, no? Which it's rejected and it's repulsive and it's grotesque, but yet people want more, you know? And the way I come to understand it is they want more, not because it is something they crave or they are more interested in knowing. It is because through putting queerness in the box of the other and the grotesque and the repulsive, heteronormativity is legitimized and it's placed in the box of like the righteousness. Because there can be no righteous without the wrongdoer.
Exactly.
So queer is the wrongdoer.
Exactly.
So we see a lot of like, and I see this in Mexico all the time. No? So this is a perfect example. There's this newspaper in Mexico that's very like scandalous. It's not real news. It's called Página Amarilla, Yellow Page, and one of the headlines for like a publication like 2 or 3 years ago was joticidio, no? Like, which is a wordplay on fag, joto, and homicide, no? Like fagicide, joticidio. And the photo was very brutal and very like insensitive, no? And it's this idea going back to how queerness becomes a spectacle, and the person who lost their life, murdered, isn't important. What's important is that they were a fag, you know? And by being a fag, their life is less important. So we can consume it as entertainment and not as real news.
It reminds us that if you're not a fag, your life is more important.
Yeah.
Because if you're murdered and you show up on the news, it's not the same.
And it's the same with women.
Exactly.
It's the same with women, and in this country especially, it's the same with like black folks, with queer folks. Like the murder of like a white girl is going to be so much more important than the murder of a black teenager.
So I love that intersection of the perception of queerness, the validation of heteronormativity, and how they coincide in the public space.
Yeah.
And I think that that was really visible here for me. People were like touching me and coming up to me and being like, "What are you writing? Like, what does that say?" Like, yeah, like they were like demanding it, and I just kept like, I was in my zone. I was doing my thing. I was performing. You know, so that's something else that I'm thinking about, obviously, the formality of it all, but I do think that this piece was very important for me. And as I'm writing, in part, I have this rag and I'm like smearing it, so I feel like, in retrospect, this is all about the domestic space and queerness and the public space at the same time. And I was performing this labor of literally smearing my queerness all over the space and doing it in public. Yeah.
We were also talking about this yesterday, how labor is something that is recurring in your practice, no? You even said yesterday how when you install your pieces, you see it as a performance, which I'm not gonna like negate that idea.
Yeah.
If that's how you see it, that's perfectly valid.
I think that's a valid point.
But I think that it also, personally, I think that not always installing a work is a performance. But if we view it in the context of your work, in the terms of Maria Pilar Lopez Saavedra is a queer Latine artist with Colombian, who's performing labor in the United States of America. What does that mean? Like, what is you performing labor in the context of art to be consumed in a white institution that is like academia, which is traditionally white? Like, what does that mean? Like, who and domesticity, we begin to question what labor really is, and like how labor is in this country. People who do labor are usually immigrants, and that is immediately perceived as like you're not in the space. You're the laborer. You're the worker. You become invisible. I can walk past you and not acknowledge you because you're literally on the floor doing the work, cleaning, and I am at eye level. So there's definitely the that you bring up in other words of power structures and power dynamics.
See, and I think that in any way, even if it's through labor, I focus on it through labor a lot, which is a body, specifically mine, so a queer, brown, immigrant, queer body is any sort of action in a space is so reflective of the society we live in. So that's why I love when you talk about my work, you say like the individual identity and the macro. I think that that's really relevant to me. Following this piece is, also, I made this like, my tools for communication. I took this cigar box, which is very 305 Miami, and I made it into this like lipstick holder with a mirror for the lipstick that I was using to smear. Thank you, I still have it. Sí, por favor. And the next piece I made was, well no, I made a lot. The next one we're going to talk about is Eternidad. So this one is a really intense piece for me. This was very labor-based, but I only documented the final piece. I formatted these individual calendars to span the last, at the time, 5 years. Now it's about 7 or 7.5. Marking from the first day I tried to come out to my parents, and we had this like physical altercation, and our entire family dynamic completely fell apart. I don't even want to say shifted, because there was like a cliff. That day was a cliff. And I have horrible memory, like as a person, like I just don't remember shit. But I will never forget any second of that day. Thank you, I needed that. But, so I think of these pieces as drawings, because from an angle like this, when you look at it straight on, one of the slowest people see it. But I had to individually mark these calendars, and I spent about like 6 hours just like crossing and crossing and crossing, and I was just all in my feelings and like crying. I was up all night, and it was just so heartbreaking for me to realize and really think about like how long it's been since I've been comfortable around my family, since I've been honest with them, since they've said I love you and I don't remember that day immediately when they say those things, you know, and it's, we've grown a lot and our relationship has definitely healed in some ways, but I think that I needed this piece in order to validate myself and all of those feelings that I have, because it really puts into perspective like how much time has passed. And I'm considering finishing this for the show that La Gente and I are putting together, but I'm missing about 2.5 or 3 more years to this, and this was actually about 7 feet by 5 feet, like it was massive. I'm thinking a lot about the labor. Of course, each calendar has 4 nails, but also this is like for me, it references crucifixion, sacrifice, religion, because that is the reason why all of this happened. Like in the name of God, I was rejected. So I think that this piece really spoke to me personally, and it was, I think, one of the first pieces in which I thought of my practice as a healing practice for myself, or a practice that would validate my own existence and my own experiences. Would you like to add anything?
I'm just thinking about like how religion begins to filter into your work, and it makes me think how in Latin America, queerness and religion cannot be separated. As much as we want to separate it, and as much as I maybe personally reject it, because in, I don't know, I want to say like 90% of the times, when someone comes out to their family, there is the religious aspect. You're not going to be let into heaven. You are now officially a sinner, and this sin cannot be forgiven because you're going to be, it is your lifestyle.
All of a sudden your family is really religious and loves going to church, and all of a sudden you believe in community.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, Bible's in the house. And
I don't know if you want to share this, but you told me that your mom told you that.
Yeah, my mom, we have to talk about these things. I love my mom. A lot of people here have met my mom, and todo lo que le digo a ustedes no es por faltarle el respeto a ella. Like, she is everything. But we need to have these conversations. So speaking to her in private and multiple times and moments, she would tell me things like, I would rather you be dead than be queer. I would rather you disappear. I don't love you, I hate you. You know, all of these things where now I feel I can speak it in a room and not feel like it's true. But in the moment, I was 15.
Sure.
You know, I didn't even, like, I got my period the year before. I was just entering the world as a person. So those things were really intense, and all of those fears that she was projecting was because she wanted to save me, you know?
Yeah.
And it was just, it was not from the right place, but it came from religion and the deep relationship that Colombian people have with Catholicism.
I personally relate to that so much. My parents basically said the same thing. I was sent to kind of like a Pray the Gay Away camp, which was the weirdest, most bizarre thing I've ever done in my life. But my mom, she would come in sometimes in my room and she would tell me, the devil is standing in that corner, and he's possessed you, and that's why you're gay.
Yeah.
And obviously, like, there's a logical part of me, you know, that knows that this isn't true, you know, that know that the devil isn't living within me. But at the same time, I was 16, I was 15.
No, and además,
it's to you.
It's impossible to pretend that we don't have colonialism and Catholicism embedded in our blood.
Sure.
You know, so I know that I'm not a sin.
But you can't, like,
but
there's a part
I
of you
spent
that,
hours praying, talking to God, and being like, why? Take it away. You know?
You're like born into, like, literally when you're a baby, you're like, they baptize you.
Yeah.
And they make you like
O sea,
part of it. Even if you don't.
And even if you don't have a connection to it that way, like ancestry.
Yeah. Even if
These
you don't
fears-
believe in it,
community.
even if you don't, you're like,
Exactly.
ay, pero Dios no.
Like these fears were forced, raped, and literally embedded into our ancestors. So this, I really firmly believe that homophobia and misogynistic tendencies and the patriarchy is a direct result of colonialism and their survival tactics that our people have taken up in order to protect our communities. And that's why it's always out of love. You know?
But also touching on the subject, I mean, I now like I went through very similar things with my parents, and it took me about the same time, like 7-6 years, to finally reestablish that communication. And I hated my parents. I prayed to God that my dad would die. Like I prayed, like, I hope he crashes at night and he doesn't get home.
And
but now and it's so hard to understand sometimes because we talked about this, and this comes up again in other of your works. In Latin America, the concept of chosen family isn't really something that is available, or does it exist? Like, I can't just turn my back on my parents.
Ever.
Like it.
Ever.
I would be considered such an ungrateful little bitch.
You personally wouldn't be able to. I personally.
Yeah.
O sea, después de todo, after everything.
Exactly.
Like, we have every reason to hate them,
But now, with time and more space from these events, I'm able to see that those actions, as brutal as they might have been at that time, I can see them now as a very misguided act of a very weird kind of love.
Mm-hmm.
Which is, in their mind, it was such a horrible thing to be a fag, that I'd rather literally beat the shit out of you to make you straight, because that is like, it's better to be sad and straight than gay and happy.
Thriving. Having artist talks in New York. Pero yeah, no, definitely religion is prevalent in the next piece I'm going to talk about. This one is Eden. Following Entiéndeme, which is the senior showcase piece that I did with the mirrors, I started thinking about space. And I definitely separated my practice into installations, and then I rounded about eventually and came back to performance. But so I really was thinking about my language, gestures of love, religious architecture. This piece and installation is based off of The Last Supper and the panels behind Jesus. Also just because during that piece, Jesus is talking about anyone who believes will be allowed into heaven, anybody, except for us. So I wanted to think about the intersection of queerness and religion and how they're one in a way, and make a religiously queer altar or bed. I made it for my ex-girlfriend, Alina. This was when I got my language and I made it into a font. So I was able to type it on a computer and print it. I know. And I was experimenting a lot with letting the audience in or not, so I would allow little pieces of it to be readable so that the audience would be able to contextualize a bit, like what I'm talking about and what I was trying to communicate. And so the altar is made of these stacked love notes, which are separate from the piece that is projected. And the bed is being held up by these bricks. Yeah, it's being held up by these bricks and just a sheet of plywood, which again is an ode to my dad. The pieces of fabric are nailed to the wall and they're hand dyed, which gave it a really fleshy kind of texture that was in like blood. Everyone was really mad at me from the installation was a mess. I fixed it because I cleaned up my own mess. And so this piece was just a declaration of love, to be honest. It was for someone. And it was, I think within that romantic gesture, I kind of deconstructed identity. Because of the intersections of race, culture, sexuality, and religion. Yeah, I think that's all I have to say about Eden.
Can we talk about cambio?
Sí. Vamos a la biblioteca del pueblo. ¿Qué?
5 minutos.
5 minutos. Y'all gotta go? Okay. The pages together. But that fusion is just the paper, which is this feminine material, but it's the strongest part of it. So definitely representing queer identities and this relationship between two queer bodies. I checked that out again with Amor Igual, which is a video piece in which I'm kissing my reflection and Alina was kissing her reflection. And then I edited the videos to make them look like we're kissing each other. So thinking about brown, queer people loving someone who looks like them and therefore loving themselves, and this radical act of self-love, which is a way to think about narcissism and whiteness and all of these things that we talked about, and kind of turning your back on that and loving yourself and loving someone who looks like you. After that, I went to Colombian, and I was thinking about my genderqueer identity and just like the definitions that I have of what a woman is, or what a man is, what a mujer is, and what an hombre is, and all of these things are very different. All of these things are very different, and they all contradict each other. So I think that having more than one definition of a woman or more than one definition of a man already invalidates gender in a way for me, because I grew up with all of these different archetypes that I didn't fit into any of them. So I went to my abuelita's house, which is where my dad grew up. And this was after she had recently moved out, which to me was like I was displaced twice, because this is the house that I had a relationship to. Like I immigrated here when I was 2, and we didn't go back for 15 years because we had political asylum. So when I go back, and now my grandmother doesn't live there, so I had to let go of this sort of fantasy of what Colombia is, this rural sort of like traditional experience, and now my grandmother lives in this beautiful apartment building that's really modern. So I think that was an important transition for me.
Also, let me jump in really quick, because you said something really interesting. You said so for 15 years you didn't go back, and then you had this fantasy of La Casa de tu Abuelita.
Yeah.
And then you go back to your grandmother's house, and it's not what you think it is. And I think that's something very interesting that happens to a lot of people who immigrate anywhere. You know? Maybe from Boston to New York, or from Colombia to Miami. How the homeland tends to be idolized and tends to be, because we see it in our mind as like, this is authentic. But when you are from either here or there, and you go back, and the one thing that makes you from here or from there is the family and the roots you have through them are not there anymore. This fantasy breaks down, and you're faced to see like reality.
Exactly. So I was in this way, like in this moment, I'm seeing Colombia as intersectional and multifaceted. It's not this magical realism, traditional place, but I'm also seeing myself as not just this or that. So I went back and I cut my hair in front of my grandmother's house, which is, I've never had short hair like this in my life, because again, the hair is so representational of Colombian values and gender and the performativity. Exactly. It was like, que linda, like, don't cut your hair, I'll die, blah, blah. So I did that. And it was really hard to cut my hair because it's so thick, but it felt really good. and I was thinking about, like the formality of performance art, and you know, I really liked that people were walking past me, and she's eating some bread, and it's on the bike, because that is how, you know, we're all on the same page.
What were you thinking, about, you were performing, you were doing art, like, the actual moving your finger. Like, that was something that was part of your body.
It was, I was so connected to it, and it was so much a part of my gender identity, and I felt like I was hiding behind it. I was wearing like full men's clothes, every day. But I felt, because I had my hair down and my hair was long, I was passing.
Yeah.
And I totally was.
Yeah.
And so, not that short hair like this doesn't make me look femme, because I'm totally embracing the femme now, but I think that I needed to face myself and just, what does my face look like without this Colombian femininity? What does that even feel like? Because I never had that knowledge. So I really wanted to push myself to do that and to express, I don't know, honestly, I got there and I was like, I need to cut my hair from this place.
Yeah.
It was just not even a question, and I never had even ventured to do that on my own, for my own personal, like, I want to look like this, or I want to see what my hair looks like.
Right.
Cambié is,
going back to the idea of like cutting your hair with this, like I have to do it here and now without, maybe it's not a professional, and it's not like this huge setup. And I told you this about other of your work, you know? There's always this sense of urgency. So I have to do this here now. And maybe you kind of were planning the idea for a while in your head, but there's no strict, it's just like, it's so visceral and it's intuitive. And I think that relates to the idea of your performance becoming a practice of self-healing, you know? And going back to the idea of rituals and how rituals are embedded in like indigenous culture and how a lot of them mutated through colonialism into like, there's still a lot of brujeria in Catholicism. It's just disguised as like Christianity, but it's still brujeria.
Yeah, or like the little things we do.
And all of these things kind of take place again in your performance, how they become a ritual and they become self-healing, and it's intuitive and it's from your heritage and it's from your most inner self. And it's very your sixth sense?
Sixth, yeah.
Your sixth sense, you know? It's taking form, and it's I like that and I appreciate that, and I think that performance as a self-healing practice is like the best thing we can do, you know, is taking art and making it for ourselves without considering, is this going to be placed here or how is this going to be shown? It's for the sake of you working through your issues in the best way you can. And at the same time, like it's draining because your work is catharsis. And catharsis is draining. So now talk about Cambié and like sí, poquito l'amor. Pero talk about Cambié, because I think in Cambié a lot of the issues that you talk on, that you dabble into, I think here you really take them into more thought out work, and they really embody your ideas. And it's a very simple, like what I like about this work is, maybe show like a little clip, just like.
I'm just gonna like go through it.
Oh yeah. Pero no puedes, can you just, no puedes play it?
No, por ahí no. I just want to show you this. Anyway.
Anyway.
Stills will do.
What I like the simplicity of the action, because I think when we try to get a point across, and we, especially in art, and we make it elaborate and we overcomplicate it, the point gets lost. And in that losing, because of complication, because of making it more artsy and more complicated, we lose touch with the audience. I mean, I like how you think, like, is my father, is my mother, are they going to be able to understand this? And how if the answer is no, you simplify it. Because again, you can't make art for the people and exclude the people, you know, because then you just become then you do become a narcissistic bitch.
Yeah.
And then you do become someone who we see always in white cube spaces, no?
Being glorified by
people who claim to do art for the people, but then where is the people? Where are the people that you're doing art for? They're not in the gallery, obviously. They're not in that space, and they're not reaping any of like the benefits, you know. So through simplicity, we have a broader reach sometimes, and I think that's what I liked about this piece.
Thank you. So with Cambié, I was really thinking about, I wanted to choose specific variables and see how they would interact together. I specifically wanted to use a white space, just like a white cube-esque room, and I wanted to think about my body as a material in relation to national objects and in relation, well, national cultural, in relation to domestic objects. So how these interactions will frame either a statement or a critique or a reflection of the personal, but also the macro society. So here, I started out with putting on my chain, which was off the floor, and filing my non-existent nails. Yeah. Then following that, this is me putting the chain on. I'm walking around and I curated 7 different outfits, which all had a different vibe to me, or were a different mixture of layers in which gender is being performed through individual objects, and when they're put together and then interacted with, they represent some sort of intimacy, but also a larger identity. Here I had like a little like name tag thing, and I just like took the nail out and like nailed it back in. I'm also thinking about what the audience is projecting onto a queer Latino body, like what do you already see, and then playing into that performativity, but then also having a lot of just real, just this is the way that I'm getting dressed, this is the way that I'm walking around. For this one, I interacted here before, after I put my pants on, I interacted with an iPhone as a domestic object, which is something I'm very interested in as well, is thinking about Latino and queer bodies in relation to tech, because I think that that is the way that we've finally been able to self-determine what our images look like, how we communicate with each other. Like, because of the internet, so much has changed, and so many communities have been able to find each other. So I started playing, I made a little playlist, and I started playing like Latin trap and salsa in order to kind of open up the space. I didn't want to interact with that at first because I didn't want the piece to seem to have like a soundtrack, but I did want that there because I was very uncomfortable being naked. This was my first nude performance, and once I put that music on, I was just singing along, and I was a lot more comfortable. These are the different outfits. I interacted with this plunger. I'm using these tools as tools, but also as accessories, and thinking about the difference between that, or when that difference happens. Each outfit also had either like a super femme scent or a really mask cologne, or something in between. So the whole room smelled like this big confusion of gender. And a lot of people were not happy about that, but I don't really care.
Wait, what do you mean?
I got a lot of critique back of being like, I was gonna throw up because the perfume was so much. And I was like, I want to take up all the space.
How much you spray in there? Like,
7 times I sprayed like different colognes.
Sounds like what you do.
I do that all the time.
Yeah.
That's part of who I am.
Did people's reactions make this different? Like what you wanted to, or like better, or how was that?
I honestly think I'm at a point where critiques don't really impact me.
Not like critiques, but like what you were seeing in people.
Well, I was trying really hard to, I wanted to make eye contact because I didn't want people to feel like I didn't know that they were there, or like they were invading in my space. Like, I wanted them to know that I am performing and not performing at the same time, because I think that everyone in this room is performing. When you get dressed in the morning, when the way you walk down the street, the way specific people will walk home at night, the way that you know, the way you walk down the street in the morning and the way you walk down the street at 2 a.m. is completely different, and you're performing. And I think that all of that is reflective of our grander society. I don't think that my specific performance is more or less important than you sitting right here and you and your outfit, you know? But I do think that in focusing on mine specifically, I can make a commentary, and I want to do that because I think that for myself, I need to understand that. So this is a flag I made, which is a mixture of the Colombian flag and the gay flag, because we don't have that design. We do, but they're always like split down the middle, and I don't like that because that's the binary, and we don't fuck with the binary. So here I'm sweeping, and then I would stand up and like pose, and all the dirt would like fall out. And following that, I folded the flag, which is one of the only objects that I didn't just like throw in a pile. I also have these tiles that I like, they're from my friend Rosalind's studio, and so is the mirror. And I just reorganized them, so I'm like performing this layer, but also not, because I'm not actually installing anything. And this outfit's called Cameo Nationalism, which I love. So for some of the outfits I'm wearing bras, for some of the outfits I'm not. Some of the underwears are very lacy, sometimes I'm wearing full like boxers. And yeah, I was just interacting with these different objects and with the space and with the, the domestic and international objects. And at the end, I was completely covered in sweat. And the assignment was like a 30-minute performance, and mine was like 20 minutes, and everyone was really impressed about it. But I feel like I needed to do that. Yeah, so that's También.
Okay, so I like this piece because this is like, I think where we can see more clearly how through individual identities and individual activities such as like hammering or cleaning or using a plunger, by themselves they mean nothing. In a cultural context, cleaning, especially in Latin America, is traditionally female. So they individually and by themselves construct a binary gender identity, which then feeds into a cultural identity, which then the cultural identity feeds again into the binary identity. So it's like a cycle, no?
They redefine each other.
They redefine each other, and I think this it's very clear in this performance. ¿Las preguntas?
Sí.
So, if anyone has.
Oh wait, I'm sorry. I have to show that one. I can't. I will go home and be so upset. Like I'm just not gonna do that. Really quick, we don't have to talk about it because I think that just the photographs themselves say something. Shout out to Sophia. Thank you so much for photographing me and making me feel so comfortable in my own skin. So I did a performance, a private funeral performance on my birthday, which is the same day that I did También. I did my 2 first nude performances. I made this installation in which I'm using the ceramics and trying to redefine my relationship to my own body and to the materials I use in my pieces, but also thinking of my body as an actual material. I wrote this poem that is based on my recent breakup, but also just overall representation of how I feel about death. And I also think that this is my favorite one because you can see the space and how it's altered through the cardboard. So I literally look like I'm 6 feet under. I think that this piece was really for me to think about how we think about life and death as a binary and how we think about things that start and end as a binary, like, love comes and it goes. Your self-love comes and goes, but I didn't want to think of it as a start or a finish, but I did want to commemorate the moment. So here I'm pretty much just looking cute for Sophia while she takes pictures of me, and I'm writing in lipstick the manifesto/poem. And then for the role number 2 is where things get real because then I actually interacted with the space. I'm going to backwards, but then I've been thinking about vulnerability a lot and how much you give to people and whether or not it matters because sometimes they just leave and sometimes it's just over, but you gave so much. And thanks to Sophia and our relationship and our friendship, I was able to really dig into my feelings about vulnerability, and I totally had a really beautiful experience that was documented in the way that I wanted it to be documented, which I think is really important, thinking about the identity of the photographer and how the subject and the photographer interact. And being that Sophia and I have so many similar identities, I feel like my body was captured in the way that I would have photographed it. So I definitely think of this as a collaboration, without a doubt, which is why I wanted to show it. This is the most recent piece I've made, and it's probably one of the pieces that has touched me the most as a person. And yeah, the way that I started immediately while having this very emotional moment. The first thing I wanted to do was like comfort myself because I felt like I was completely alone. Even though Sophia was there and I felt their love and support, I felt so isolated. And at the same time, I eventually started caressing like the ceramics and the cardboard and all of these things at the same time as I'm touching my body. And through the interaction that I had with the space, I feel like I really solidified my body as a material in the same way that the ceramics is a material, the same way that the cardboard was a material. They were all touched in the same way, and they were all for my comfort in that way. We were one. So that was really special and probably my favorite piece that I ever made. Yeah. So thank you for coming to my talk.
If anyone has any.
Yes.
I don't have a question, just a comment. I think this work is just inspiring, and I'm so happy that I was able to have my final review with you last year, and like, because you presented some of this work there, and just like the difference of the way like people asking questions and like accepting it, and like the way they're experiencing this like now compared to when they were experiencing it in final review.
You saw them
So
do me dirty.
different.
They always do me so fucking bad.
It was annoying. It was bad. Like, you know, like they were trying to talk and, you know, nobody really could connect with the work. I feel like nobody even critiqued anything that you did. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you were getting the critique.
We're forming a collective for artists of color so that we can actually critique each other, because in these white institutions, like, people are so afraid sometimes to say the wrong thing that they don't say anything at all.
And there's no access to it.
I would rather you say something really fucked up and then we can unpack it like together instead of you just staying there quietly, because then there is no conversation and there was no point. But thank you. I'm glad that that's validating for me, because you saw that. So thank you. That's what Sótano's for. That's why we're here. So thank you to Sótano. Any more questions or? Are you guys feeling good? Is everything? I feel good.
So, if that's it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
I think it was really good.
Thanks. You did great.
You did amazing. And so, there's wine.
I just want to say thank you guys so much for coming. And we just started this artist space as of like September. So we're very open to the community. We want you guys to come in here, curate shows, do artist talks, have events, poetry nights, whatever you feel that you need to be creatively thriving. We are here for you. So don't hesitate to reach out. We're here to work with you guys.
Yes.
And thank you for coming.
Sótano.
Thank you.